Right now, I'm going to turn the time over to Imam Yasser. He comes to us from the Islamic Society of Greater Salt Lake. He also leads the downtown Salt Lake Mosque, and we are so grateful for him today to be here. He is going to share with us a prayer or a blessing from him, and then we will move on to our keynote presentation. So thank you very much, Imam.
Thank you, B'nai. To all of my fellow participants, faith leaders, and everybody who organized this a very important event for our community and our state, I greet you with the Arabic greeting in Islam, Assalam alaikum, which is peace be upon you, and in Hebrew, Shalom, which means peace be on you. Today's event, although online, but the spirit of this event is as strong as in person as it was last year. I'm privileged and honored on behalf of the Islamic Society of Greater Salt Lake, the first and the oldest Islamic organization in the great state of Utah, to do the opening blessing and prayer. I thought very, very deeply that a person who is not worthy of speaking to all of you in your leadership and in your rich faith traditions, what can I bring that will not only inspire me and inspire all of us together as a diverse community of faith leaders and participants to fully capitalize on this great initiative that helps heal our community from the challenge that it faces. And I found something that I would like to share with you. As a professional in the medical field and a researcher by education, and also a licensed sacred text scholar in Islam and its traditions, one of the first things before we receive our license to teach the sacred text to anybody who comes to our doorstep is that our teachers, before they impart on us the license, they take from us a reminder and an understanding and a commitment in this manner. Our Holy Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, he said to one of his companions 1400 years ago, he said in the sacred tradition that all the teachers, when they have students, they impart on them and then they take their commitment before they give them the license to teach, is that they have to verbally agree to this statement by our Holy Prophet. Let's consider the statement. The statement is by the companion of our beloved Prophet, Muhammad, peace be upon him. He said, Ar-Rahimuna yarhamuhum ar-Rahman. The people who are mercy givers on earth, the one in the heavens who is the most merciful, shall give them mercy in abundance if they show his creatures abundance on earth. And then he said, Irhamu man fil ard, yarhamukum man fis sama. Show kindness and mercy to everything on earth, and the one who is in the heavens will shower you with his mercy. So as a faith leader and as an imam, which the Arabic word means to be the person in the front, we have the first and foremost responsibility to share and express kindness and mercy to all of our people and inhabitants in the states, regardless of their backgrounds and regardless of their traditions and regardless of the challenges that they have faced. And when we do that, we will receive the abundance of God's mercy on us in our lives, and we will become the beacons of mercy so we can share and celebrate the mercy of the Almighty. With these words, I solemnly pray that whoever has organized this meeting and the compassion and the humanity that went into organizing this event, and for all the people who are listening, that the one Almighty gives us the ability to achieve the fulfillment of mercy on earth and to celebrate his mercy and share his mercy to the fullest extent that is available to us and shower the people who need the help most in these difficult times with the gift of mercy for all mankind. And with that, I say Ameen, and peace and blessings be on all of the prophets, starting from Adam and ending with our beloved Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And thank you for giving me this blessed opportunity to address all of you faith leaders with your rich traditions and your backgrounds and your commitment for our state and our community. Thank you.
Beautiful, Imam. Thank you so much. We appreciate your participation today. We're going to now turn the time over to Lisa Hanson, Jeff Case, and also Javier Allegra, and I will let them move forward. Thank you all.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session of the Faith Summit 2020 virtual. We are honored, and this is a privilege to be here and to be able to speak to you all and to share some of our experiences and some of our knowledge or some of our lived experiences throughout our lives. I want to thank Lisa and Jeffrey for their support and for their encouragement and for having me present with them. I just want to say that the title of our presentation is, let me go back, is Promoting Belonging, Preventing Suicide Through Actions and Promoting Belonging. And I want to focus a little bit on promoting belonging. And I want to share a couple of my experiences as Hispanic Latino man, an immigrant living in Salt Lake City for nearly 30 years. And some of those are a bit strong and a bit perhaps unexpected. But I just want to share with you some of the areas in which we perhaps don't necessarily see racism or discrimination or cultural connection or integration in our daily lives. There are some examples that I want to share with you, and some of those are. The first one would be when I was growing up in my country of origin, which is Chile. As a young man, I always wanted that sense of belonging. I always wanted to be a part of something. That, for me, with having grown up Roman Catholic, with a family that is Roman Catholic, I didn't fit in there. I didn't feel like I was a part of that community. So I searched multiple denominations and congregations, and finally landed on converting to LDS, Mormonism. I served a mission, and I came to the United States after my mission to attend Brigham Young University. As many of us do, as many missionaries do, and as many LDS members do, come to the promised land, so to speak. That is the vision that we have when we are outside of Salt Lake City. We look at Salt Lake City as this pinnacle of happiness and unity and community where things are just perfect. And we aim for that. We want to see it. We want to be a part of it. We want to be able to walk through the temple. We want to be able to be a part of the General Conference and be in the tabernacle, the new or the old. So all of those things build up in our heads. And when I finally got here and I came to Utah, and I was so excited. I was so elated to be here. I was very, very disappointed on my experience when I went to the church. The church was entirely different atmosphere, and I don't want to really point fingers to anyone, but this is my experience. This is what I went through. So the church for me in Utah, it's much different than the church outside of Utah, and I did not feel welcome. I did not feel that sense of belonging that I had in my church in Chile, or in my congregation in Chile. Many assumptions were made about me, many comments. I remember the first time I walked through to a Sunday meeting, not a single person said hi to me, and I was so nervous because I didn't speak the language, I didn't know anybody, and I was on campus, so there were a lot of classmates and young people in there. So for me, it was very challenging to introduce myself to anyone. In fact, I try not to talk because my English was so broken. I was embarrassed. So that experience, along with many others of similar in his emotional intent, really threw me into a very deep depression. A very deep depression. I did not know, because when I came here, I felt like, oh, I'm going to have a family there. My church is my family. My church or my congregation is going to be that support system. Latinos and Hispanic communities have a very strong sense of community, a very large sense of unity and solidarity. And here I felt it was all very single-minded. Everyone was out on their own, and there was really not, in my opinion, in my vision, no sense of community. So I was very depressed. I went through therapy. I went through counseling. I experienced or experimented with self-medication in multiple ways, and eventually, I began to understand the differences in the culture. Hispanic, Latino versus Eurocentric or white America. And it was very, very healing for me to understand that none of my experiences were personal. It was not about me. I wasn't the person in the faulted person, or the person that was damaged, that would not be integrated into this sense of community that I had an image of in my mind, which was based on my growing up experience and my lived experiences in my country. It was different here. And once I learned that wasn't about me, that there was just a different space, a different mindset, I was able to move forward and begin to build this life that would turn out to be much different than I had expected it. But I do want to say that assumptions and stigma and stereotypes play a big factor on me not having this sense of belonging. I can share multiple experiences, but in a nutshell, I was assumed to be uneducated, was assumed to be many things. And with that, I recluded myself, I retrieved myself, because I didn't want to connect with anyone, because everybody had already made an assumption about me, which is entirely incorrect. And I felt like I needed to find my tribe, so to speak. I needed to find the people that were not necessarily like me or looked like me or spoke like me, but those that have the same mindset or the same mind frame in which we would connect at a much deeper level than just skin deep.
Javier, you make an interesting point that I want to emphasize, if you don't mind. I want to underscore that you perceived the congregation as feeling like they were offering belonging, but they were not. And they may not even have been aware. And that's our first point, is that just because we think we are speaking the speak, talking the talk, and we think we're doing something, we may still be missing the point. And important groups and individuals may feel as though they are stigmatized, discriminated against, and oppressed by our efforts. I just want to underscore what you're saying.
Thank you, Lisa. I was getting to that. Can you mute yourself? Okay. So I just want to say that I want you all to know that as I grew emotionally, mentally, and physically in this country, I grew to understand more and more. But I want to encourage you to welcome those, make an effort, and extend your hand sincerely and without assumptions to those that come into your congregations. It is very difficult, and I don't know if I really can convey this message. It is very difficult to move from a country that is all that you know into a new space where you don't know anyone. And when you go to church that one day, when this new person happens to be there, that first visit to the congregation, to the church, to the mosque, whatever it might be, you have no idea how hard that moment is. So many fears. And then having it not be necessarily what we expect it to be, that is, a growing lesson we have to face, right? We need to learn that we're in a different space, and we need to learn to navigate that. However, had I had someone come up to me and say, "Hi, what's your name? Welcome. Where are you from?" Or even just sit next to me, it would have been a much different experience. And I also want to challenge everyone today to think about the assumptions you make in your mind. We all do these. No one is perfect. Our mind runs faster than we can speak. So our mind thinks before we can say, "Oh, no, that's not right." And we don't say it. However, I want you to challenge yourself to think about what are the assumptions that people make when you see someone in any space, whether it's your workspace, your church, your congregation, or your free time. When you see someone, when you are faced with a new person that looks different than you, what are the first assumptions or the first thoughts that come to your mind? And do you make judgments and decisions based on those initial thoughts, which a lot of us do? And then, it reverses itself in the end, because for me, I started to make assumptions about the dominant culture here, or the Eurocentric culture, or the white culture, that I did not want to engage because I knew they were this way or that way or this other way. And I found myself learning I am doing the exact same thing that I feel it was done to me without even noticing it. So it's not enough to say I'm not a racist. It is not enough to say I don't judge, because we all do. Whether we speak of it or we say it out loud, initially and in some form we all do. I invite you to look into cultural humility and understanding how this can be so impactful for your congregations and for your practices as well, for those that are professionals in the area. And I just wanted to say that cultural humility and cultural integration, which cultural humility and integration are the same thing, it's just a new term, but the approach of cultural humility is to understand that the point of being culturally appropriate or culturally sensitive comes from self-reflection. So understanding that there are power balances when they don't need to be any power balances, and to develop partnerships with those other people and organizations where people that don't look like you exist or are. Cultural humility is based on understanding the other person before you. If you can take a moment to try to understand what the other person's perspective is before you utilize your filters to make an assumption or a judgment, that might change your perspective and that might change your mind. I wish one of my colleagues would have been here to share one of the experiences that she had, which Lisa and Jeffrey heard, because it's so powerful and so intense, and I'm not sure that it will have the same effect if I share it. But Lisa, if you feel that I should, I will. But is that a thumbs up? So okay, so one of the interns we had at Latino Behavioral Health is from Mexico. She is attending school here. She is a member of the Catholic Church, and she is in fact an ordained nun. And so she is a sister. She came here with her congregation support to attend school and to get her degree. Now she is going through her master's degree now. And she is an incredible human. She is lovely. She is full of love for everyone, service-oriented, community-oriented. Now, when she first got here, she's here in the States living in a home with two of her sisters. So there's 3 sisters living in this house. And when they went to church that first Sunday or whatever day it was, when she first got here, she had a very similar experience as I did. The 2 sisters that live with her are Caucasian, and she is a Latino and Hispanic woman, the person I'm speaking about. And when they got to the church, she had a similar experience as I did. No welcome, nobody would talk to her, and some of the assumptions that were made of her is that she was the maid of the other 2 sisters, that she didn't speak the language, and some other assumptions to the same ilk that she still has to deal with, and she still feels like have not gone away. So it's very hurtful and frustrating when our assumptions come out in actions. And we can not only really hurt someone's feeling, but we really can isolate someone that is of tremendous help and support to your congregation. I mean, I'm talking, had she come into the church in her full habit, she probably would have not experienced any of these. But she did not. The sisters, her congregation, wears casual clothing as any of us would. So it was not evident to the congregation that she was a nun. So they assume in media what is, well, she lives with 2 white sisters. She's from Mexico and doesn't speak the language, so she's probably not a nun. She's probably the maid, or she's probably someone that cleans, or she's probably someone that whatever else, and many others that I'd rather not mention. But so just think about it. Just challenge yourself. Think about what comes to your mind. Stop in your tracks and experience that moment. Why am I thinking this? Why am I making this assumption of this person that I've never seen before? Whether that be ethnic minority or a homeless person or anyone that comes into your periphery. I would have loved it if my experience would have been different, but it is what it is. I've grown and I've learned from it, but I've also learned to understand that I am also a part of the solution. So open your minds, open your hearts, and welcome everyone. And so long.
Thank you, Javier. I'm just going to give a quick answer to this question, and then we're going to move on to introduce our listeners to who we are as we're speaking. But one important way of knowing whether your group is inclusive is if there's a pathway for people who have experiences that are not optimal to actually talk with your group about that and let them know. Without having that pathway, you may never know what people are experiencing in your group. We'll talk more about that later. Want to introduce you to us. You've just heard from Javier Alegre, the Executive Director of the Latino Behavioral Health Services in Salt Lake City. Jeffrey Case is with us, and he has a black screen. So I'm just going to show you a picture of Jeffrey Case, who is a clinical psychologist. There, you get to see him. I hope your screen shows more of him. There we go. And he works at the Veterans Healthcare Administration. And the person who's speaking, me, I'm Lisa Tensmeyer Hansen. I am the clinical director at Flourish Therapy, a nonprofit providing subsidized therapy to the LGBTQ community in Salt Lake and Utah counties. We would like you to understand how the belonging that we're talking about, the inclusion, relates to the suicidality. That's the overall point of our summit, and Jeff is going to share that with you.
Thank you, Lisa. I'm so happy to be here. The question always comes up, how does belonging relate to suicide? The most concise theory on this came from Dr. Joyner, a psychologist, who asked the question, why do people die by suicide? The simple question, or the simple answer to that question, is that suicide is not the solution, but it's the perceived, it's not the problem, but it's the perceived solution to the problem. And he went on to identify 3 other areas that kind of clarify what that problem might be for individuals. And so I'll spend just a brief minute talking about this. One area that we kind of look at is perceived burdensomeness, that the sum of my life is worth less than my death. And being around other people makes their lives harder or more worse off. And there are many examples for how this could look, but people who experience chronic health problems, prolonged periods of unemployment, psychological problems as well can be perceived as burdens on others. We also know that in home settings where there's domestic violence, that the person might also be perceived as a burden on others. When that gets heightened, people start thinking, if I just weren't around other people, they would be better off. And the thoughts of death start to kind of creep in, and suicidal ideation comes in. The other component that we're going to really talk about, though, is this perceived burdensomeness. As human beings, we rely heavily on connectedness, on being parts of a group, of a family. We assign groups to people when we see them, and we identify ourselves by the people that with whom we associate, often with family or religious ties or ethnic ties. But we all are part of groups. And when you see groups happening and people being rewarded for being in groups, and you're not a part of that group, you start feeling outside of it, right? And then the messaging that kind of comes in from that, when you are feeling like an outsider in a group where the rewards are happening, again, the suicidal thoughts can start coming in. We know that with perceived or thwarted belongingness, right? The efforts to connect are thwarted. When that occurs, suicidal thoughts get very strong with that component as well. When the thwarted belongingness kind of combines with the perceived burdensomeness, people start really contemplating ending their lives, and active suicidal ideation and planning comes into play. I'm not going to touch too much on acquired capability. This is Joyner's 3rd part. The ability to enact violence on oneself is an acquired ability, and there are some things that kind of go into that, but we're really going to talk today about that. Belongingness. And Javier's story illustrated the impact of the thwarted belongingness. He was in a new country, in a congregation. He wanted to be included, and he saw people around him experiencing being included, but didn't have access to that. And the depression kicks in. Depression is strongly linked to suicidal thoughts and suicidal behavior, right? And so looking around, trying to make sure people that are on the outside, on the fringe, are connected, they feel like they're a part of us. Let me give you a quick story. I was active duty Army for 8 years, and when I went to my officer basic course, we were kind of a sea of sort of the same kind of people. We were all wearing the exact same outfit, and we had the exact same haircut. We looked very similar, but in walked a young man who looked different than the rest of us. And he didn't get the memo that he needed to come in uniform, so he was wearing basketball shorts and a tank top. He had a dark skin relative to everyone else in the room, and he had very distinctive Middle Eastern features. he stood out, and he was and perceived as kind of different for a number of different reasons. But when I saw that he was different, I was very curious as to how a Middle Eastern-looking man could be sitting in a U.S. Army basic training course in 2006. And so I made it my point to sit with him and find out what his story was, and that conversation changed the course of my life, helping him feel included, part of us, laughing over his sad costume choice for the day. But we have he was a Shia Muslim who came into the military as a medical officer and remains a very dear friend of mine. But we have to have that inclusiveness in order to benefit from the safety of having a group around us. And when that's not there, depression and suicidal thoughts will be present.
Thank you, Jeff. The lovely thing about Joyner's model of suicide is that it has received a fair amount of research, and it actually seems to be supported in the real world, if we want to put it different from the thinking world. When people start to feel thwarted belongingness, that's when suicidal ideation begins. When you add to it perceived burdensomeness, that's when repeated suicidal ideation continues. That seems to be reflected in people's experience. So being aware of what our actions do to create belongingness, or that seem to reject others' contributions and make them feel as though they're a burden, those are important actions within our ability to help people feel like we value their mental health. Next slide helps us understand what it is that actually happens when people are excluded. It isn't just all in their heads, at least not to the extent that anything that happens to us, including physical pain, is also in our heads. But what research is helping us understand is that when we experience a snub, or when we experience people who we perceive to be in power, even if they feel rather powerless, or they feel like they don't know what to say to us, or they feel like they're not discriminating against us, when actually the circumstances suggest that they are, when we experience this, there are almost immediate physiological consequences. We experience if someone walks past us without speaking, there is a measurable increased cortisol response in saliva. Heart rate accelerates, and the measure of heart rate variability, which is one of the strongest measures of many kinds of health, immediately decreases. We also get a measurable awareness of distress in the dorsal anterior cingulate cortex, which is identical to the distress experienced with what we would consider to be physical pain. It registers in that part of the brain exactly the same. What we also discovered from research is that when people are socially snubbed, or when they experience discrimination and oppression, their ability to tolerate stress is reduced. There is increased irritability, a decline in cognitive performance, and memory confusion, for which people who experience this are then often blamed for why they weren't included in some way, when it's actually the consequence of lack of inclusion rather than the cause. I wanted to say just a little bit about the history of exclusion and how it happens. Processes of inclusion and exclusion have been part of almost all histories of societies. It seems to happen naturally as a society decides what makes for good living, or what makes for healthy living, or what makes for a way of survival. Societies seem to slide into exclusion. And in order for that to be repaired, societies actually have to deliberately do the inclusive actions. And societies that actually create inclusion following exclusion can create better societies. Those who do the opposite, that is, people who have been included and are now excluded, actually have worse outcomes. So once we begin inclusive actions, it's important to continue along those pathways. What really stands out to me about Javier's stories is that the people who were stigmatized or who were dismissed didn't have a way of letting the people who probably cared about this, there was no pathway that the people in power had created for others to say, I've been hurt by the system, and to have that story be valued. And without that pathway, people who care sometimes don't know. So it's important for the people who are in power in an organization to create that pathway, make it open, make it safe, and make it inclusory, rather than to blame someone who might have a complaint. This slide, I think we set up for Javier to tell some of the stories that may have already been told, because this one is about whether accidental exclusion is as damaging as deliberate exclusion. And research tells us, yes, it is. People have the same response to accidental exclusion as they do to intentional. That may be because when it is accidental, we don't know that. We also don't know, if we're being excluded, whether there's something that's actually going on in people's minds that they're not going to tell us, that it actually made it intentional, or that they are experiencing a prejudice that makes it just as damaging. Javier.
I just want to say very quickly to emphasize your point that I am very well aware that most of the damaging situations in my experiences were unintentional. I don't think anybody, especially in my congregation, especially in my church, and I don't think I said that, but I wholeheartedly believe that no one was intentionally trying to hurt me. And that's what I meant when I say, when I understood that it wasn't about me. It was about what we do in everyday life and stepping outside of that and perhaps opening our minds with cultural humility as to what somebody else's experience looked like. That might make a world of difference.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. This question is an important one, supported by research as well. Unless we actually have sufficient numbers of people at our table who are different from us, we will likely never receive their perspective. Our circles of power are not safe enough for people who do not have a history of their voices being valued to simply step in and have their voice valued. A really important article in BYU Magazine within the last couple of months made this really clear. In the engineering department, women who were in the engineering department, there were only enough of them during the time of this evaluation to have one per small group of engineering students. What was discovered was that when there was only one woman within the group of men, their voices were not heard. There had to be an equal number of women as men in order for their voices to begin to be heard. And we can imagine transferring that to many other groups that we desire to include. If they are not in some way at our table, we are likely not to hear what it is that's keeping them from participating. This is our action slide, and each one of us on this team has brought a few of our action requests to you. And I think, Javier, if you want to start, I think the first one might be yours.
I think this goes back to what I was saying with our minds are faster than we can control. So sometimes when we are presented with a situation that it's unfamiliar, or we are in a space where we see an unfamiliar face, we tend to gravitate to what we know and the people that we know. This can be, like Lisa was saying, an unintentional exclusion of someone new, or someone that is not comfortable, or someone that is experiencing we don't know what this person is experiencing. I like Jeffrey's story about take a moment, sit next to this person and ask him, hey, where are you from? What are you doing here? Not what are you doing here, but what brought you here? And get to know that person and give him an opportunity. But more so than anything, take a moment to learn how to recognize those moments in your mind when the assumptions are being made. When you see someone or experience something that is unfamiliar or perhaps threatening in your own perception, why? Why is this threatening me? Why do I feel uncomfortable with this? Is there actual danger here, or is just my preconditioned existence that is telling me, society, etc., etc.? Just take a moment, delay the reaction, and then perhaps do the opposite of your initial reaction, and then extend your hand and sit next to this person.
Jeff, are there ones here you'd like to comment on?
Yeah, I think it is that listening. It's that a lot of times we are not truly listening. We're just waiting to interrupt. We're waiting to defend. And and I'll talk about this in a minute, but when we're feeling defensive, to kind of sit with that and say, I wonder why I'm feeling like I need to defend myself, instead of just listen and have the humility to ponder that perhaps I unintentionally caused harm, or unintentionally created a space where someone didn't feel like they belonged, or separated them. So just, please listen.
Thank you, Jeff. I think one thing that might be important for us all to know is that when people are willing to complain to you about your organization, that is a very good sign. Your response to that will make all the difference. It means that in some respect, they feel like they may have a positive impact on you. How you respond to complaints of people about not feeling like they belong is perhaps the most important method by which you show that they belong. And that's what our next slide is about. If you have questions on this one, we didn't discuss all of them. We are happy to answer specific ones, so please put them in the chat box. This next slide is about how to respond when someone is, wait, this is not the one I thought it was. This is a good one too, though. Responding when someone offers you something that feels difficult, the least helpful response is to explain. When someone says, actually, I'm not the maid, I am a participant here, to try to explain why you thought they were the maid is the worst possible response to create belonging. To accept the difficult news would sound something like, my bad, period. And allow them to tell you more about them. This is a way of taking a one-down position when you have done something oppressive or something that is offensive. Okay, inclusion and action. I think, Javier, we were inviting you to maybe address some of these as well.
Absolutely. And I think these points go back to some of the elements that I had mentioned before. If you take a moment to delay the reaction and then stop yourself and try to remember that moment, what are you feeling? What are you thinking? And then perhaps at that time or at a later time, revisit that and say, why was that my reaction? Why did I think those things without even speaking to that person? So while you take that moment to reflect, perhaps delay your self-analysis and then reach out to someone that looks different from you. I know that in my congregation, we were always taught this. As missionaries and as young people in the church, we were taught, reach out, sit next to someone different, sit next to someone new, or a visiting member of the congregation. Don't sit with the groups that you always sit with, because that creates exclusion and it's unintentional. I know that. But in a congregation, we want the whole community to feel welcome. I mean, if we sit in different spots all the time and avoid grouping, that I invite you to do that. It creates a much different environment. When you walk in the room, consider your assumptions. Like I was saying, stop yourself, remember, be present in that moment, and start thinking about why am I reacting this way, thinking this way. We all do it when we walked into, I speak for myself, when I walk to church and I walk into the doorway and then I look, where should I sit? Where are my friends? Where is my tribe? Where are my peeps? And then I look for the best possible, most comfortable, innocuous space for me to sit. And then stop, think differently. Look at it and say, like, who is new here today? Who looks different than me? And then let's go and sit next to that person. I know that it's uncomfortable sometimes and scary, but you probably don't know the experience that person is having that day. That person is just as scared, just as nervous as you probably are or would be by sitting next to him. But that moment can make a world of difference for that person.
And even because each of us can make a difference as an individual in a group by doing exactly what Javier is talking about, there's also ways that people in charge of a group, whether it's a class or a whole congregation, can create an atmosphere that makes very clear that that is what this group is about. A leader has tremendous power over the ambience of the group in these ways, of making people feel welcome, of making sure that people are included, of making sure that it is a group norm to not sit in the same places that one usually sits at, to make sure that if someone leaves the room because they feel distressed, that someone is aware and cares for them, of making sure that people who seem to have reactions to what is said in a group are brought back in some way that is safe for them, of taking complaints in a way that suggests that person's experience is as important as someone who feels very confident within the group. Jeff, do you want to say anything about these, inclusion and action?
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. And I would say that there's that saying. It's one of our favorite scriptures that says, "By small and simple means are great things brought to pass." So don't underestimate the power of sitting and smiling and being friendly with someone. I would say to add to this, inclusivity has to be in what discussions we're having. So I'm a gay Latter-day Saint, and I do feel on the outside in a number of different settings, but that's fine. I understand my role in that. However, when I was asked to speak a lesson on the atonement, I said, well, I can't talk about the atonement without talking about my experience as a gay Mormon. That's how I've learned about the atonement. And the church leader was not comfortable with that and thought church was not the right place to have that discussion. So my voice was silenced, and my experience of Mormonism was devalued, and I felt like an other. So I now have that stipulation. If I am to speak, that my experience in gaining an understanding of Christ will come from the place of my own experience, and my voice does need to be included. So that I would like to add that with this piece. We're going to talk a bit about what happens though when we make actions to include, when we start changing things. It may create discomfort, and I think Lisa and Javier have both discussed this discomfort. I have felt very uncomfortable at times as well, trying to be inclusive and reaching out. What I would say is that discomfort is a helpful thing for us. It teaches us. Stepping back one step, when we consider that mood is designed to educate us, to inform us, if we're feeling uncomfortable, we're being informed that there's a thing that's kind of disjointed or perhaps out of alignment, right? Learning how to sit and be okay with being uncomfortable, we will learn things about our own world and the worlds of those around us, what's happening with around us. So sitting in that space where we can kind of be uncomfortable and see what comes up for you. Why not have a discussion? Why not sit with a person? And you might learn something about yourself, right? I gave a lesson recently on the experience of women at church, and I was going to share some experiences from stories that I'd gathered over the years from various friends. I can't speak for women, but what I could speak was of their experience, and it made a lot of the men in that room uncomfortable, and they felt very defensive. And I told them the rule was, you may not say, but most church leaders are really good men. I don't care, that's true. But I want you to sit with the discomfort and let that teach you and inform you about what kind of leader you intend to be if called upon. Do you want to experience that discomfort, right? Guilt is designed as an uncomfortable emotion to help us stay within our own value system, keeping our behaviors and our words within our value system. So guilt is designed to teach us about what it is that we value. So be okay with being uncomfortable. It has taught me a great deal about myself, and I think it would instruct you as well to understand kind of how you understand yourself and how you understand the world. Don't be afraid to be uncomfortable.
Thank you, Jeff. We've come to our final words. Javier?
I first want to say that it wasn't my intention today to point fingers or to highlight any particular congregation. However, it was my intention today to share my own personal experience, and that happens to be my path. I do want to say that I want nothing else but for all of us to work together and to get to know one another. If I understand cultural integration or humility in the way that I do, I could say to you that the only thing that we all know is that we don't know what somebody else's experience looked like or what somebody else is going through. The only way we can find out if we understand and accept the fact that we don't know and that we need to put ourselves aside for the other person and try to enter or understand or at least welcome that experience into your world. Cultural integration is not about you taking a class, checking the box and saying, I'm culturally competent now. Cultural integration and cultural humility is an ongoing process. It's a process of getting to know one another. Culture is a very broad word. It can mean so many things to so many people. However, when we talk about welcoming spaces and creating a sense of belonging, we have to know that we know one experience and it's our own. Somebody else's experience is different. So I welcome to stop the assumptions and consider acting or reacting the opposite way that you normally would. If you feel threatened in certain spaces, take a moment to sit with that thought, sit with that perception or conception, and then try to understand why. Where does that come from? Does it come from fact? Does it come from my lived experiences growing up in a family in a certain way or in a culture that is in a certain way? But just give everybody the benefit of the doubt and then sit next to them and get to know them.
Thank you, Javier. And my final words are about how faith congregations, since the time began to be written down, since history was written down, have had difficulties in excluding people that eventually became included in congregations as full participants. And so it seems to be a path for every congregation at every time to consider who it might be excluding and who God might actually want to be included at the table in discussing how next to do the work of the faith community. Bené?
I want to thank all of you for being here today, for Lisa and Jeff and Javier. I think we addressed most of the questions that were in the chat, and I want to reiterate what many have said, that they are very grateful for the information that you have given and ways that they can look at their own personal beliefs and biases and how they're treating others when they walk into a room. I know myself, I started thinking about people within my own religious congregation that I could be better at sitting next to and reaching out to and calling during the week. Thank you all for being here. Thank you, Lisa, Jeff, and Javier. I appreciate you today. It was wonderful. For all of those who attended, please know that there will be a recording of this session and we will send it out. There have been questions about sharing your slides, and I don't know if you're comfortable with that. We've talked with the other groups that we will make them available via a PDF so that they can view the content, but also with the importance of reaching out to someone to do a training within your congregation that is qualified to do such training is important. We also will be sending resources out with the follow-up email with this recording. We have this amazing digital resource binder that is available to all of you that has all the resources within Utah for your use. So again, thank you all for being here today. I can't express how grateful I am to all of you. This was wonderful. Thank you.